Right, well, tonight my name's Bob Johnston, for those that don't know, and I'm going to talk a little bit about first principles. Now, nowadays, most people, if they buy themselves a proper camera, they're coming from a phone. And let's face it, for some purposes, a phone is better than a camera. You know, if you want to take pictures of your kids, you want to take a selfie, you want to take just pictures on your holiday and things, you don't necessarily want to have to think about all the complexities of a camera. You just use your phone. However, that's not what this talk's about. I assume that you've spent loads and loads of dough on a special camera and you want to know how to use it. Well, there's a lot to this, unfortunately, but we can give you a taste of it anyway. So I'm going to go over here now. First of all, right, okay, sorry about the technical hitch. Right, I'd like to point out that in the old film days, and a lot of youngsters now actually are back using film, we had very little to think about technically, really, because your film speed was fixed. That's what's called your ISO in modern cameras. And so all you had was your aperture and your shutter speed. And that's all you had to fiddle with, really. But now cameras are horribly complicated. So just as an illustration, I don't expect you to actually know any of this, it's just as an illustration of what it's like. I took my camera, the X-T5, and if you're shooting in JPEG, well, I'll explain that in a minute, you have 21 different film presets to think of. You've got grain effects, colour chrome effects, 4 different dynamic range settings, highlight and shadow tone selections, and Uncle Tom cobbling all, you know, and it's very confusing. So what I would say is, once you start out with a camera like this, is choose a film preset you like and forget about all the rest. Just forget about it. Just leave it at a standard and just go and take some pictures. And then as you get into the camera more and more, you can start to experiment and do new things. So, modern cameras, yes, are too complicated for their own good. Now, my camera, the X-T5's got lots of buttons on it, and you can program them to do different things. So that is useful, but you've got to remember that you can easily press a button when you don't mean to do it. So anyway, that's getting into the nitty-gritty. Now I've put here X-T5 JPEG options. Now, with cameras nowadays, there are 2 different possible output scenarios. And one is what they call JPEG. It stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. And it's just a way of containing a picture in digital. Most people will certainly start off doing that, but there's another system which is called RAW. And RAW is not really RAW, but that's another story. But basically, the camera has an awful lot of data in it. You know, nowadays when you take a picture, all you're doing really is collecting data. The raw data is 14 bits, and there's an awful lot of it. So if you take a picture in RAW, you can modify it afterwards to anything you like. Any of these different film presets, everything, you do it all afterwards. This is a great advantage, but it does mean that you have to have a computer. And you have to do it all in a computer. And the computer does the work that the camera would do. So there are lots of advantages to RAW, but you know, if you're beginning, I would just start off in JPEG, really. So that's that. Now, exposure, you see, this is a thing called the exposure triangle. Oh, and by the way, most people have laser pointers, but I have a back scratcher. Right. It's a multi-purpose back scratcher. It's much better than a laser pointer because you can scratch your back, you see. Anyway, so you've got 3. So you've got your ISO. Now, what does ISO stand for? It's International Standards Organisation. Now, way back in the, I'm not reading my notes, so I hope I'm doing the right thing. Way back in the film days, in 1960, everyone's film doubled in speed, because what they did was the International Standards Organisation decided to use a different method of quantifying the film speed. So all of a sudden, all the films were double the speed they were before, which shows you how sort of it's not very exact. But anyway, there you are. So when things went digital, they kept this thing ISO, and each step in this ISO scale is double the one previously. Look, 100, 200, 400, 800, so on. Each one is double the speed of the previous one. So if you take a picture at 100 ISO and you then decide to move to 200 ISO, you're going to have to do something to compensate, because you've got a stop difference. So shutter speeds are sort of similar. So you've got, look, 1 second, half a second, quarter of a second, and then it starts going a bit awry, like instead of a 16th, it's a 15th, look. And then it's a 30th, 60th, and instead of 120th, it's 125th. It doesn't really matter. These are much the same. Each step is twice. In this case, I was going that way, so each step is half the exposure of the previous step. So that's your shutter speed and your ISO. Apertures, oh dear me. This is where it gets very confusing, because they didn't seem to make much sense. But in 1858, a guy called John Waterhouse invented a system of metal discs with different size holes, which could be dropped into a slot in a lens. He called them Waterhouse stops, because the discs were literally stopping the light reaching the lens. So that's why we talk about stops. That's where it comes from, all those years ago. Now, what it is if I had a lens which was 100 millimeters in focal length, and the hole, the diameter of the lens at the front was 50 millimeters. This is oversimplification, by the way, but 50 millimeters. Then if I divide the 100 by 50, we've got 2, haven't we? And that would make it an f2 lens. But because of the way the maths work, no need to get into technicalities, but because of the way the maths work, each one of these, say going from here, each one of these is 1 stop more. And it's this end, the f1, which is letting the most light in, and it's this end, the f22, which is letting the least light in. I hope it makes some kind of sense. So you've got these adjustments on your camera. Now, what I would say is, on an average day, set your ISO to something that you think will work, for that day, that will give you a reasonable aperture. Say you were out and about, say you set your lens to f5.6, and say you were in town taking pictures of people. You would then need a fairly fast shutter speed, because people move. So make it at least 125th of a second. To achieve that, you set your ISO to whatever, and just leave it there, and just alter your shutter speed or your aperture. That's what I would say. Okay, so that's the so-called exposure triangle. Now, this ISO bit here is actually, technically, it's quite interesting, because this is just like turning up the volume control on your radio. You remember the old-fashioned radios? Well, the youngsters wouldn't know that, but the old-fashioned radios, you turn up the volume, and you don't just get a louder noise, you start getting all this as well, you see, as Chris would know. And that's what happens. That's why it says image noise on here, because as you increase the ISO, your pictures will get more grainy, they get more noise in them. Now, nowadays, modern cameras are amazing with this. They are actually not as bad as they used to be. They're really very, very good. So don't worry about using higher ISOs, except when you're doing landscapes and natural history and things like that. Because, well, perhaps less natural history, but landscapes, because there's another thing that happens. They say image noise on here. This makes you think that as you increase your ISO, all you're doing is getting more image noise as well as more sensitivity, but you're not. There's another thing as well. I don't know whether it's next. I hope it is. This is noise, by the way, and this is for my camera. It's a Fuji X-T5, and you look. There's a peculiar chink here. Look. So for those with a Fuji, you can see that it's better to use 500 ISO instead of 400. I won't go into why this happens. I'm not even sure myself. but as this is ISO on the bottom, look, you can see as the ISO goes up, the noise, which is the noise here, increases and increases and increases until it tops out up here. So that's that. Now, there's something else happens though. When you increase your ISO, you get a narrower dynamic range. You probably say, well, what the hell is that? Well, the thing is, it used to be called latitude in the old days when we had film. It's the difference between what you can record between the deep shadows and the highlights. And as the ISO goes up, the ability to record, look, this is dynamic range. Well, okay, this is a bit meaningless, but this is the dynamic range going down and down and down. And as a matter of fact, this is comparing the Fujifilm X-T5 in blue with the Canon EOS R5 Mark II in black, which is a full frame camera, you see. And you can see that there is, in fact, quite a bit of difference. So this shows that full frame cameras are in fact less noisy than APS-C cameras. But in practice, you wouldn't probably notice. But you can see how it goes down. I mean, up here, look, we've got nearly, well, the Fuji doesn't quite make it, but the Fuji's 10 and a bit stops, look, it's got of dynamic range. Whereas when we heat it 6400, it's only got about 4 and a bit. Only got about 4. So that's why it's desirable to keep your ISO lower when you are taking, say, a landscape and your camera's on a tripod. Tripods! There's less reason for tripods these days, less need for them, because cameras have very clever inbuilt image stabilization, which to some extent gets you out of using a tripod. But tripods have certain advantages. You wouldn't take this with a tripod, would you? So I'm making this up as I go along now. This is a case where you would choose a very high shutter speed. I think this was about a 700th of a second or something. Something I didn't explain. You can set your camera manually to these different shutter speeds, or you can set it to, say, aperture prior to automatic. And what aperture prior to automatic means is that you set your aperture, say I'll set it to f5.6, and the camera sorts out what shutter speed. But you've got to keep an eye on your shutter speed, because you're going to have a very high shutter speed to stop that cricket ball. Same applies to if you're taking pictures of jet airplanes or fast-moving birds. You're going to need a very high shutter speed. So you're probably going to need a high ISO. Whereas this course is a total opposite. Here I've used a very slow shutter speed. It's probably about 1/8 of a second. I've probably got it written down here, but you know, somewhere. And I've panned with the people. You know, it's just for just for effect. You know, I'm not saying it's any good as a picture, by the way. It's just to illustrate the point. So you can use shutter speed as a creative option. And here's another one. This was probably about, I think, if memory search, because I looked when I did it, I think it was probably about 50 seconds. It's not quite sharp actually. Look, the camera's moved slightly because where's me back scratcher? Where's the back scratcher gone? Oh, there it is. Look, you can see those lights up there look slightly blurred, but and here look a bit. But anyway, as an illustration, so I've set the camera up at night, and of course it's easy to get long exposure at night. If you want a long exposure during the day, you may have to use what's known as a neutral density filter, but that's probably a bit advanced for me. This is another one. Sorry, I haven't got the faintest idea what speed that is, but it was probably about a quarter of a second, something like that. So you can get the movement in the water so it doesn't look quite so static. Here's an example of, I've taken this picture, not very sharp actually, taken this picture of a Chinook, and it's really not right because the rotors are almost stationary, aren't they? Look. So it looks like it's hanging on a piece of string because I've used too fast a shutter speed. This is very difficult actually with these. So here I've used a slower shutter speed, probably about 125th or 60th. Very hard to get sharp pictures because you have to use very long lenses. they display a long way away nowadays. So you have to take lots of pictures to make sure you get a sharp one, you know. But now we've got movement in the rotors, so it looks like it's doing something. Depth of field. Something that aperture alters is depth of field. In other words, how much is in focus. This is my girlfriend, Amanda. She's doesn't cause me any trouble. I don't get any back chat off her. Anyway, so this is a 50mm, it's a 35mm lens, which if it's a full frame camera, that would be 50mm, and it's f1.4. And you can see everything in the background is very blurred, which might be what you want. And this one is at some other aperture. I think it was probably f8 or f11. And you can see how the backgrounds all come in. So that's another creative thing that you can use your aperture for. You can use it as a creative option there to blur the background or make it sharp. Oh, sorry, no, I don't want that one. Not yet, anyway. Now, I went out the other day with my camera. David Clapp makes me feel so inadequate because he's got all these fantastic pictures. But all I managed was to crawl into the park and, took these pictures. Now, when you take in JPEG, you can see on the back of the camera or in your viewfinder what it's going to look like. Now, in this situation where there's all this mist and mostly white highlights, you may have to override the camera's automatic aperture priority. You may have to use what's called exposure compensation, and there will be a little dial or something that you do that with, and you may have to add a bit of exposure on to make it look right. And this person walked into the picture, so I just took it, and it's not a great picture, but this is a point. You need to practice. You need to practice all the time. It's no use putting your camera away for 6 months and expecting to operate it correctly when you get it out. You should know how to operate a camera in the dark, which you may have to do if you're taking pictures of the stars, or you're taking pictures of you're taking pictures of the Northern Lights, as people have been doing lately, for example. You may need to, or just street photography at night. But you need to know how to use that camera without really thinking about it. So practice, and it's the same with composition, you see. You have to practice. And when you get your picture back, you can look at it and think, well, what's wrong with it? You know, before you chuck it away, because it's horrible, you look at it and think to yourself, well, how could it have been improved? This is how you get better. It's not just the pictures you take, which are, you know, really good pictures. It's the pictures you take, which are not so clever. Now, this is David Clapp again, you see. So he sends me these things. Now, there is such a thing as post-processing. Now, now he did some pictures. This was taken over Christmas. He lives near Dartmoor, you see. It's all right for some, isn't it? He went to Eastman's Woodlands, amongst many other places in Dartmoor, got some fantastic pictures. Now, these are forest pictures, obviously, and they're in mist. And mist always helps you with these because it simplifies the background, you see. Anyway, the point is, this was how it was taken, but it wasn't the idea that he wanted to put across. He wanted to put across a different feeling altogether. So he made it cooler, and he reduced the saturation of the colours right down. And the result is much better. We've got is much more interesting. This is another one of his. He doesn't know I'm showing these, so he'll kill me. And he just went out over Christmas when he got this. And you notice he's a master of composition. I mean, it just is. And what a superb composition this is. You've got the horse on the right, and he's looking round at us. Well, at him. And the mist in the background to give us the depth, so the picture's got depth. You have to remember that when you take a picture, you're trying to show something in 3D, but it's in 2D. So you've got to give it an impression of depth. And of course, the mist does that. And then the horse on the right-hand side and this rock here are balanced in composition by this branch, this tree. And it causes, of course, it's like a frame as well over the top of the picture. Well, the thing about composition is, I mean, you see lots of things on the internet about it. And the idea is what we're trying to do is lead our viewer's eye to the subject, but at the same time to make it balanced. So we use leading lines, we use sharpness, luminosity, colour, all kinds of ways to lead our eye to the subject. Well, of course, in this case, we've got a white horse, which is amazing. I don't know how he finds these things. Anyway, here's his picture, look. And you notice how he's composed this. So you've got this here, then you've got these here, then this here again, like that, and into the distance. A very clever bit of composition of something that's very complicated. Well, the thing is, if it looks right, it is right. So what you need to do is look at your pictures and think, it doesn't look right. Why doesn't it look right? And eventually you'll get better and better. And the other thing to do is to look at other people's pictures, but not just any person's pictures. I mean, I think I've got it written down here somewhere, I can't find it, you know. I can't find it, but I think last year they estimated that there was several trillion photographs taken in the world, estimated. And so the question is, how do you make yours better than any of theirs? See, the average photograph really isn't that good. You've got to make yours better. That's what I think. Now, you can look at art. Now, look at the composition. Now, I said a balanced composition. Now, this one, which is... this is one by Degas. I've seen some very raunchy pictures by Degas, by the way, in Paris, but that's another thing. Anyway, he's most famous for pictures of ballerinas. But look at this crazy composition. Now, if this was put in front of a club judge, he'd say, "Good God, man, why did you cut off the legs? What's this guy cutting half here for?" You see, wouldn't he? You'd get shot down in flames. But this is Edgar Degas, the famous painter. They think this was, of course, Impressionism, and they think that they were influenced by the camera, because there are a lot of people going out with cameras, and this is the sort of thing they get, you see. And they think that they were influenced, that they were using a new form of composition due to the advent of the camera. The irony is, shortly afterwards, everyone with cameras was trying to make their pictures look like paintings. This was called pictorialism. Sometimes it works. Look at this. This is another Degas one, you see. It's a post right in the middle of the picture, virtually. But I'm just showing you this to show you that some of the rules, the so-called rules, you may read about these rules in photographic books. You may see it in YouTube videos. Oh, you've got to have things on the thirds and all this. It's not really true. And then, of course, you have things. When you take a picture, normally, yeah, it's got to say something. So when you're taking a picture, you are taking it. It's not the camera that's taking it. You could send the camera out on a robot or something and you wouldn't get any decent pictures, would you? Everything that you know, everything that you've seen, everything, film that you've watched, book that you've read and everything is in your head, and that goes, and what you like goes into that picture that you take. Or alternatively, like Jackson Pollock, you can just take that. You know, this doesn't have any message, well, it doesn't for me anyway. But look at this. I mean, this is by a British, English artist, and I can't read his name on here, so I'm sorry, I'm completely, but I remember what this is about is they were putting a bird into a vacuum chamber. And of course the bird dies, which is why they're all like this. These guys say, look how wonderful this is. This proves that air keeps you alive. And they're not really, don't see the joke. Anyway, but look at the light in that. Isn't that fantastic? It's a painting, of course. I mean, isn't that absolutely fabulous? Normally, the painter that we look to for dramatic light is Caravaggio. But this is a superb piece of work, and look at the composition, this beautiful circular composition as well, and the way that she looks at him, he looks at her. He's looking directly at us, look, and the others aren't. Superb piece of, he's looking at us, superb piece of work. You look at these things and you get ideas, and you get ideas about how to compose your pictures. This is a very famous picture, The Boating Party, by Renoir, and look at the way he's arranged everything. Look, triangle, 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 triangle. It's all triangles. It's just superb the way he's, apparently a lot of his friends were in this, but what an incredible piece of work, really. This is Stubbs, and again, you see, classical composition. This is not, because you think a club judge will come in and say, "Oh, you need to crop that off there. He's not doing anything for the picture." But it's a famous artist. That's what he did. And what of this would have been taken for the horse owners, and this would have been their local landscape. And now we get to a favourite photographer of mine called Ragnar Axelsson. I think that's it. He's from Iceland, although this picture I think was taken in Greenland. And again, look how powerful it makes it. If he'd put that dog in the middle, it wouldn't be anywhere near as good as that. Of course, it's balanced a bit by these buildings in the mist, but it's very off-centre, isn't it? And here's another one, look, it's got the Dutch tilt on it, that's what they call this. It somehow makes it, you know, it works, doesn't it, somehow? These are the people of Greenland. I think this is somewhere else, but I think this might be the Faroe Islands. But this is more conventional. So this is, sorry about, apologies about this. This obviously isn't on the original photograph. I had to copy it out of a book. There's something really going on, so that's very important. I mean, it's got tremendous interest in that. The cow obviously does not want to go the same way as the farmer wants her to go. But the actual composition with this leading line here, and then this, and then in the middle distance you've got the buildings, and then out into the distance with the storm going on. Superb piece of work, but more conventional. Here's another one of his. Now, it's obviously triangular composition. Then, of course, we've got this one. But have you ever noticed how photographic this is? Look at the background. He's done it all fuzzy. It goes out of focus. It goes, you know, he's actually using differential focus on this as if he had a camera, which wasn't even invented at the time. So, yeah, to give the picture depth. There's lots of very strange things about the Mona Lisa, actually. If you look here, look, this is higher than that. If you look at a hair there, it's transparent, you can see through it. There's all sorts of strange things, but however, that's beside the point. You can see how he's used gentle side light and a blurred background. Here's another one, look, by Degas. And again, he really likes these weird compositions, doesn't he? What do you think? She looks very fed up, doesn't she? It's called the oh, sorry, brain's gone. The absinthe drinker. This is one of mine. So here's a compositional trick that we all use. It's very hackneyed, but you know, we've got a leading line, and in this case what I've done is, so this leads your eye into the picture, but of course in this case what I've done is a slow exposure as the tide goes out. You take it as the tide goes out. No, taking an exposure, I don't know what it was, quarter of a second, half a second, something like that, half a second perhaps, and it's created that effect. But it was just to illustrate this idea of depth in a picture by having this sort of effect in it. So these are all things you should think about when you're starting your photography, you see. So I've shown you a few things here about composition and so on, and a few pictures, just to show that the aesthetic side of it is more important really than the technical side. But hopefully I've shown you one or two things that will get you thinking, and you buy yourself a book or look on YouTube, lots of stuff on YouTube, and hopefully what I've said will start you off in the right direction. Right, well, I'm giving this talk at the Grange Photographic Society in Coventry. It's held at the Copsewood Sports and Social Club every Wednesday, 7:30 for 8, and anyone is welcome. We don't take money off you unless you really like us, so everyone is welcome. We have portrait sessions, model sessions and so on, so we do actually do active photography as well as presentations like this, and come and see us please.